Well, next, Clark H. Pinnock is a well-known proponent of evidentialist apologetics whose approach to the defense of Christian faith has been usually diverse. His Set Forth Your Case book focuses on the philosophical and cultural movements that shaped 20th century thought in order to expose the inadequacy of non-Christian worldviews. Again, worldviews coming into play here. In this book, he decries rationalism and mysticism and espoused the epistemological alternative of empirical verifiability. Thus, his apologetic system centers on the historical resurrection of Christ and the historical reliability of the Bible. So here, his focus is on the resurrection and, I guess more broadly, the historicity of the Bible.
Yeah, and so you notice what we've done now. We've in this, and beginning with Pinnock here, we've moved toward an approach that just doesn't assume Christianity to be true, and it's not just focused on deism. Now we begin to focus on atheistic belief as well, with in terms of their presentation of Pinnock. Mm-hmm. And so, like other evidentialists, Pinnock uses several lines of evidence as reasonable probabilities that combine together like argumentative links in a legal brief or strands in a rope, right? So he offers, in fact, yet another metaphor, not only the legal brief or these rope strands, but he says, like legs of a table, each shaft of evidence does its part to support the weight of the case for Christianity. And so because we're all culturally conditioned in different ways, it is inevitable that some of us will be more impressed with one evidential approach than another. So again, we have this idea of these various lines of approach, lines of evidence, allowing us to have a cumulative kind of approach, right? Mm-hmm. Pinnock acknowledges that the knowledge gained through empiricism is only probable, right? So this isn't certain knowledge. This is deductive knowledge. This is kind of an inductive kind of approach here. But he maintains that one cannot wait until all uncertainty disappears before dealing with ultimate issues, right? At some point, you have to get off the fence, right? You have to make a decision because these are ultimate issues. And so if all we have is probability and we can't be certain, waiting for certainty, could get us in trouble in the long run, kind of idea.
Right. And one could argue maybe there's no such thing as fence sitting, but we'll get to that later. Which direction do you want to go? Archaeology, eyewitness testimony, the scientific evidence in Scripture, prophecy. All these are kind of different ways to kind of hit a person that they might not be too predisposed to hearing about archaeological evidence that supports the rationality of Christianity. It could be the eyewitness testimony in Scripture and the undesigned coincidences that can be pulled forth. And so here Pinnock would use these different strands and avenues of approaches to talk to his interlocutor, his audience.
Yeah, this reminded me when I was looking at this of William James in his arguments for against the idea that you have to have sufficient evidence in order to believe. And William James makes a similar type of argument here. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a pragmatic argument, right? If sometimes all we have is all we have, and so we have to make a decision based on that. And so that's the kind of idea that we see here.
Right. All right, then we move on to John Warwick Montgomery. And he has numerous books and articles, years of teaching on the graduate level in the United States and France, and public debates have earned him a prominent place as a Christian theologian, historian, lawyer, and apologist. I mean, he's just doing too much. He needs to slow down because he's making us all look bad. Well, Montgomery influenced Josh McDowell, through whom evidential approach gained a wider popular audience. Evidence that demands a verdict was McDowell's big one. And then he's since published new evidences that demand a verdict. And I think he's written with his son. Yeah. So it's a big, thick book. So if you just want to, plop it down and say there's all the evidence, you can go through it that way as well. But in the 1970s and 80s, Montgomery was the leading advocate of the evidentialist approach to apologetics. So he's the guy. He's the guy that inspired a lot of people. And I believe Mitch Stokes is also studied under him as well, who we read before.
And so Montgomery's apologetic system is, like other evidentialists, strongly empirical, right? With an emphasis on the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He regards apologetics as a kind of evangelism designed to overcome objections to the saving message of the gospel. He seeks to do this by grounding Christianity on historically verifiable truths, beginning with a demonstration of the reliability of the gospel records as a primary historical document.
Mm-hmm. Well, given the authenticity and competency of the New Testament documents, Montgomery then defends their testimony to Jesus Christ. He cites a fourfold test for exposing and determining perjury from a legal text. First, the internal defects in the witness himself, that is anything about the witness that would undermine his credibility. That's a very key in our legal work today. We talk about if you're the nice neighborhood lady next door who didn't even have a traffic ticket, and you're the one pointing the finger at the murderer. Well, then that person's more likely to be believed than the prison snitch who is claiming that the person confessed to him with all the grisly details. And sure, I mean, he may get 10 years off his sentence, but he was there, and you should believe him. So the credibility of the witness is important, and that's determined in our court of law. And so here, Montgomery wants to do the same as well. Well, then the second is the external defects in the witness himself, that is motives or reasons why the witness may be lying in this instance. Again, very standard. The third part is the internal defects in the testimony itself, that is inconsistencies in the witness statements. So, you witnessed the bank robbery. They got into a blue car and left, and you saw the driver. It's those two men at the witness one, but it shows on camera that it wasn't the blue car. It was actually a red car. So, they have inconsistencies with the witness testimony there. And then the fourth one is external defects in the testimony itself. That is inconsistencies between the witness statements and other facts or testimonies from other witnesses. And again, you have testimony for the defense and for and for the state and the people trying to present the case that it is true. And so you have these conflicts. And so are you able to overcome with a certain degree of favorability? And again, all four of these work together in conjunction. So, if you have a person who may have bad eyesight, but knows cars in and out, well, their testimony of the vehicle identification might actually be swayed more in your favor, because that person knows, exactly what that particular engine sounds like. And so even though it was fuzzy because they didn't have their glasses, they were able to identify it through that. That might sway people who know a little bit more about cars, and so they're more likely to take his testimony rather than the person who has 20/20 eyesight. But maybe that person knows how to draw people, and so they're really focused on details, and they're able to tell exactly the bank robber's mole that was on his right cheek, and he had a goatee. Not all people that wear goatees are evil, mind you, except in other universes. So all these things fit together, and all these things are what Montgomery is wanting to look at to defend the testimony of Jesus Christ. And so this is a big task to take because it's putting up all these various strands and subjecting them to outside argumentation. So it's not just something that you posit, you also have to defend, just like a court case does.
Right. And so notice basically what he does here is he looks at the witness, right? Him or herself, the credibility of the witness and the motive of the witness. So that's a look at the witness. That's the first two. And the second two then looks at the witness's testimony. right? It's inconsistencies and that sort of thing. So these are the two main things that he focuses on with these fourfold tests: the witness itself, their credibility, their motive, and then the testimony of the witness and how does it align with the facts, right? Mm-hmm. And so what he does here then is he applies this fourfold test within an evidentialist approach, and he presents 4 reasons for concluding that the New Testament documents cannot be impinged or impunged with providing false testimony. And so we see these 4 then approaches here. First, there is no reason to regard the New Testament writers as untrustworthy, right? So that's the credibility of the New Testament writers. And he says they are trustworthy. There is no reason to regard them as untrustworthy. Secondly, they had, that is the New Testament writers, no motive to lie about Jesus, and indeed suffered greatly for their testimony to Jesus. And so that is the motive of the witnesses, right? So that's the first 2 that we referenced before. And now he looks at those with regard to the testimony regarding Christianity. So the witnesses, they are no reason to see them as untrustworthy. There's no motive to lie. Thirdly, the gospel accounts differ enough to be regarded as independent, yet are not inconsistent with one another. So this one and the next one, now he's looking at their testimony. And their testimony, obviously, is the gospel accounts, right? That's what he's looking at here. And then fourthly, the New Testament accounts have been abundantly confirmed by archaeological and historical study. So they're internally consistent, right? And the external evidence seems to confirm what they're saying. So they're all 4 of his particular criteria are met with regard to the New Testament.
Mm-hmm. Right. So why don't people look at this and believe? It's weird. It's all right there. Well, the next stage in Montgomery's apologetic is his argument for the resurrection of Jesus as a historical event. So just like how the classicalists would kind of hinge their second part of their argumentation on Jesus, well, it makes sense that Montgomery is going to as well. Well, the core is the missing body argument. If Jesus' body didn't rise from the dead, then someone must have stolen it because an occupied tomb would have brought the resurrection story to a grinding halt. The New Testament talks about, we know where the grave of David is. Let's go there, and we could see where he's buried. His bones are right there. So why wouldn't the Jewish authorities go, what are you talking about, being raised from the dead? There's the Roman guard right there. We could just have them roll it back, and there it is. But it seems like now we have to pay people to say that the disciples overcame the Roman guard and then made away with Jesus' body. So that's really what happened. So someone must have stolen it, right? That's there. So because an occupied tomb would have brought the resurrection story to a grinding halt, but the Roman authorities would not steal the body because that might contribute to unrest. Upend what exactly they wanted to squash. And really one of the reasons why Pilate went as far as he did was pronouncing death on Christ, because he was essentially put in Jerusalem, this backwater country, to quash all uprisings. And he had ingratiated himself to the Jewish people himself by mixing the blood of those he slaughtered into their sacrifices as a big no-no. And so he wasn't on as best of terms with the Jewish leaders as what he probably wanted to be. So that's the Roman case. Well, the Jewish authorities would not steal it because that would undermine their religious influence. Again, one of the reasons why they brought Jesus before Pilate was because they couldn't carry out a capital punishment. Only the Romans could. And to steal the body as a way of not making a martyr of Jesus in that way would completely upend their influence. And then the disciples wouldn't steal it and then lie about Jesus rising from the dead, because that would get them into trouble with the Romans and Jewish authorities, precisely for the reasons I just mentioned. And, as the story goes, what were they doing? Well, they weren't boldly proclaiming, the death of Christ and the travesty of both Jewish and Roman leaders. They were hiding. They were hiding in the locked rooms, and they were sending their women out to do what they would not do. So all these things kind of fold together, showing that the missing body scenario seems to not hinge on a stolen body, but on it just going away. So by process of elimination, then no one stole the body, and therefore the body must have been raised from the dead.
Yeah. So there you have it. Romans didn't steal it. The Jewish didn't steal it because of all these various results. And of course, the disciples didn't steal it. And so Jesus' body had to be raised. He had to rise from the dead. And so he goes on to say that given that then that Jesus rose from the dead, can this fact alone establish the truths of Jesus' claims to deity? And Montgomery stoutly answers in the affirmative, arguing that the very nature of legal argument, judgments rendered on the basis of factual verdicts, rest on the ability of facts, he tells us, to speak for themselves. He points out that the resurrection did not occur in a factual vacuum, but was accompanied by Jesus's own explanation of its significance as the miraculous act of God. So Jesus said he was going to do this, then it happened. And so it was not done in a vacuum. And of course, we have all of these various facts that he points out. And so it shows that indeed Jesus rose from the dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think he probably could go farther. And I believe Tim McGrew has gone built upon this idea where it's not just a factual vacuum of Jesus' claims, but all of the Old Testament you can bring in and say, well, this is what should have been expected. It wasn't expected because of various reasons that the Jewish authorities weren't doing. That was in line with what they should have been doing. But Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53, all these things fall upon this one fact. And in fact, that's all what Christian history has said, is that all of human history has led up to the focal point, which is the cross at the top of the hill. And so it's not just Jesus' own words, but it's all the words of the Old Testament as well. Mm-hmm. Well, not only can Jesus' resurrection alone establish his deity, it can establish the existence of the deity in the first place. The existence of God then becomes what Montgomery says here is it becomes the proper inference from Jesus' resurrection, as he himself explained it, not a priori metaphysical hurdle to jump in order to arrive at the proper historical and evidential interpretation of that event. So the last comment is aimed at classical apologetics, which argues that the existence of the God needs to be established before trying to show the truth of the meaning of the resurrection. Listen, you guys, you don't need a two-step approach, just this one, because if you can prove Jesus, his claims, if I rise from the dead, I am God, worship me, well, then that's included.
And he rises from the dead, and therefore his claims have been shown to be true. Yeah.
We should at least listen a little closer to the guy who rises from the dead. Okay. Well, Montgomery, in fact, was one of the first evidentialists to self-consciously distinguish his apologetic method from the classical approach. So no longer is he just answering against deism, but he's also separating himself out further from the classicalists.
Yeah, so he there's this deist thing, but he's focusing on the atheist, and he does that by saying God exists, and you can tell it because Jesus rose from the dead, and he said he would do it. And oh, by the way, you don't need this two-step approach, classicalists, right? Because we have the resurrection, right? And that shows that not only is Jesus God, but that if that's the case, then God does exist. And so we don't need that two-step approach, right? All right, so that's Montgomery. Next in our trek here is the last person that they want. So there's five major folks that they're focusing on here. And Richard Swinburne here is the last guy they want us to consider. The diversity, they tell us, of evidentialist apologetics would not be well represented without some notice of the work of Richard Swinburne. So from 1977 to 1981, Swinburne, who was a British philosopher, published a trilogy of books in defense of theism. And then in 1989, he launched a 4-book series defending specifically Christian beliefs. And so these 7 books constitute, they tell us, the most sophisticated evidentialist defense of Christianity to appear so far.
So again, it's dangerous to listen to this podcast because as we're supposed to be taking books off our shelves, we might be putting 7 more on top of this. Well, in 1996, he published Is There a God?, in which he offered a more popular level statement of his apologetic. Swinburne summarizes his argumentation at the beginning of the book. He says, scientists, historians, and detectives observe data and proceed thence to some theory about what best explains the occurrences of these data. We can analyze the criteria which they use in reaching a conclusion that a certain theory is better supported by the data than a different theory that is more likely on the basis that that data would be true. So everyone does this. Historians, scientists, detectives, what you want to eat for dinner, all these things come because you bring in the data, you look at it, and then you make the best inference to it. And there's argumentation to be made of, what influences come to you from the outside and the inside. But what he's saying here is that as it comes to big important things in our lives like science and history and murders and crime, they take in this data and then figure out which theory best explains the data for all that's come in. Well, using those same criteria, we find that the view that there is a God explains everything we observe, not just some narrow range of data. It explains the fact that there is a universe at all, the scientific laws operate within it, that it contains conscious animals and humans that very complex intricacies, organized bodies, and that have abundant opportunity for developing ourselves and the world, as well as the more particular data that human report miracles and have religious experiences. So all those things from the creation of the universe down to us, down to the fact that there are claims of religious experiences and miracles, all those things form together, which the existence of God explains it the very best. Well, then the very same criteria which scientists use to reach their own theories leads us to move beyond those theories to a creator God who sustains everything in existence.
Right. And so Swinburne's central apologetic argument is that the existence of this God is significantly more probable than not. Right? He contends that the existence of God provides a simple, powerful explanation of what we already know. He says it remains passing strange that there exists anything at all. But if there is to exist anything, it is far more likely to be something with the simplicity of God than something like the universe with all of its characteristics crying out for explanation without there being God to explain it. Right? Mm-hmm. So God is the best explanation of all of the various facts that we see.
Right. Well, he admits that it is always possible to challenge this or that element of his or any other theist argument. He points out, though, that this is also true in science, history, and politics. So we can't say we absolutely know this to be the case because you can say, but do we? Because we've always said that for previous things in science and history and politics. But life is short and we have to act on the basis of what such evidence as we have had time to investigate, he says, and to show on balance to be probably true. So he says, we can't just wait until time X for us to make the determination of is there a God or is there not, just as we can't do that for the evidence for evolution or relativity or for whether or not Caesar crossed the Rubicon. All these things have to you have to make the determination at a good point if you have enough available data to you. And it seems like all of history, all of creation, all of the eyewitness evidence and external reports lead us to have at least the ability to make the claim here and now of whether or not God is true. And he's going to posit that it is true that God exists.
Right. And of course, we just saw this same claim with Clark, similar claim anyway, with Clark Pinnock, right? He makes a similar claim. Now, where Swinburne says life is short, and so we have to make a decision, Pinnock says basically the same thing. We can't accumulate all of the evidence, and then because there are vitally important issues that we need to make decisions on. So this is a real similar type of claim that we just saw with Pinnock. All right, so what's the conclusion of all of this? We've kind of worked through these 5 apologetics, right? And they tell us that although these 5 apologists profiled in this chapter are identified with the evidential tradition pioneered by Joseph Butler, some distinctive differences, as we saw among them, shouldn't be overlooked. John Warwick Montgomery is perhaps the most thoroughly empiricist or inductivist of the 5, by which we mean that inductive argument or factual investigation plays the most comprehensive role in his apologetic, they suggest. He's also the only one of the 5 who is overtly critical of the classical apologetic tradition and its reliance on deductive arguments. And of course, they mention that yet even with Montgomery, he rejects pure empiricism.
Well, evidentialism is by nature rather eclectic. Evidentialists freely combine multiple lines of reasoning, often from widely different disciplines, in support of the Christian faith. So they might take how to question a suspect from detectives, but also might bring in a historical approach that doesn't align with solving cases for crime.
Right. Or maybe science as the scientific method to look at a certain amount of evidence.
Exactly.
And that sort of thing.
Exactly. Or mixing science with history as well, and doing that case as well. Well, we know this cold fire can't be known in history because we can't create it, and therefore, the way that different old style armies use this burning, unburning fire is not possible. Well, except we have multiple reports of it happening, and we just can't produce it. So, we have to again take the evidence in and go, okay, well, which one do we trust? All these different lines of eyewitness testimony, or would we say, well, we can't create it, therefore it's not possible. So even among the sciences, the hard sciences, we have to do what the evidentialists are claiming as well. Well, thus, they often recast arguments from other apologetic approaches as elements in an overall evidential case for the truth of Christianity. Each evidentialist also tends to emphasize those types of evidences that are of special interest to him or her. In the following chapters, we will examine the evidential approach in greater detail, drawing on the writings of these 5 apologists and others who follow in the evidentialist tradition. And so that's what we'll do next time when we get to chapter 9, Evidentialist Apologetics, Faith Founded in Fact. And we'll see if they hold the key to making it easier, because it seems like if two-step approach is a bit much for us, especially I think we covered it a little bit last time in the negative, is sometimes it's such a heavy concept for people. You're talking about a priori and talking about all these things. Well, just give them probability that they do in their everyday life, and maybe even in their own job. They take in the evidence and they look at, okay, what choice best to make. You can talk to police officers, or you can talk to scientists, you can talk to historians, you can talk to the person driving the bus, because of the way that we take in evidence and make the best outcome in our own mind. We'll speak to them, and these different lines of argumentation come out, whether it be archaeological, eyewitness testimony, prophecy. All these things can still be included in the evidentialist model. And instead of 2, you just have 1 approach. So that's what we'll look at and see if they hold the key to what you want to be when you grow up to be an apologist as well.
That's right.
So we'll continue on with chapter 9, Lord willing, next time. And we'll always say thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.